Charlie Munger once said, "Understanding that both the power of compound interest and the difficulty in getting it is the heart and soul of understanding a lot of things." In 1256 AD, Ibn Khaldun told the story about the invention of chess and illustrated the power of compounding. As one version of the story goes, a king was bored and demanded that a wise man create a game of strategy and wit, a noble man's game, a timeless game, a game that will last through the ages. The king promised if the wise man succeeded, he will grant the wise man anything he desired. After a few years of deep thought, the wise man returned to the king and presented him the game of chess. Just like the chessboard of today, there were 64 squares on the board. Fascinated with the game, the king was going to grant the wise man's wish. The wish was simple but powerful. The wise man asked for a grain of rice to be placed on the first square, 2 on the second square, and to continue doubling the number of grains until the 64th square. Puzzled by such a unique and seemingly simple request, the king said, "Sounds reasonable enough. I have huge stores of rice, I can spare you some. 1 on the first square, 2 on the second square, 4 on the third, and so on." When they got to half of the board, the king was shocked. He was already in the hole for 279 tons of rice. Being an honorable king, he held his tongue. By the 64th square, the king would have had to cough up 1.2 trillion metric tons of rice, or about 18.5 quintillion grains of rice. The world today produces about 520 million metric tons of rice a year. What the king owed was more than 2,300 years of today's rice production. Investors measure their long-term performance by their ability to compound their capital. The higher the rate, the more powerful the compounding. With a 10% return, an investor will double his money in about 7 years and 3 months. With a 15% return, the money will double in about 5 years. Over a 30-year time period, the difference this 5% makes is truly remarkable. $10,000 compounded at 10% for 30 years is $175,000. At 15%, the same $10,000 will be worth $662,000, almost 4 times more. The other variable which leads to compounding greatness is time. Warren Buffett was worth about $3 billion on his 65th birthday. Today, at 93 years old, he is worth $118 billion. 98% of his wealth was created after his 65th birthday. Between his 65th birthday and his 93rd, he was able to compound his wealth by 14% every year. The high compound rate that continued for another 28 years resulted in him becoming one of the wealthiest in the world. But what would have happened if Buffett had a permanent loss of half his wealth on his 65th birthday? He would still be wealthy, but less so, about 59 billion poorer, dropping him from the 5th richest to the 20th. When you lose half your capital, you will need to double that amount to return to where you started. With smaller amounts of capital and less skill than Mr. Buffett, losing money can set you back years. In the words of Buffett, rule number 1 is don't lose money. Rule number 2 is don't forget rule number 1. Compounding is truly magical for the patient investor. $10,000 placed in an index fund in 1942 with dividends reinvested would have returned the patient investor an astounding $51 million today. Imagine that. There was no need to understand financial statements, analyze businesses, or even read the newspaper. All you had to do was do nothing. It has been said that investing is simple but not easy. This is especially true when the news is filled with calamity. It often seems like the world might end. In 1942, when you invested your $10,000 in the index, the world was still at war, which only ended in 1945 with the dropping of 2 atomic bombs and a whole new set of problems for the world. There was a Cold War with the Soviet Union, several financial crises and wars. It might have took an unusual person to hold on through all of this. In fact, there was a report by Fidelity that showed that the best performing portfolios belonged to the dead. The dead could not shuffle around their portfolio. Blaise Pascal wrote that, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. We have a tendency to do something and to optimize. That is human nature." I quote Charlie Munger. The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. And the big money is not made in the buying and selling, but in the waiting. Compounding is not limited to the field of investing. Knowledge compounds too. From a societal level, knowledge has compounded in pronounced ways. In the 18th century, Newton discovered gravity and led to the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment. With Newton's principles of gravity discovered in 1687, we are now able to send satellites into orbit and use other celestial bodies' gravity to change both the course and speed of our space probes as they traverse the Milky Way. In the book, Atomic Habits, the author James Clear posits that habits are compound interest of self-improvement. He says improving by 1% isn't particularly notable. Sometimes it isn't even noticeable, but it can be far more meaningful, especially in the long run. Warren Buffett, in his talk at the University of Florida, said it best: "The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too strong to be broken." If you like this video, please help our channel by liking and subscribing. It will help us stay motivated to create more videos that can help you in your financial future.